In this video, we are going to discuss the parts of the brain that deal with memory and then some of the problems associated with memory. The first brain structure that is involved with memory is the amygdala. And the amygdala regulates emotions and plays a part in how memories are stored due to the influence of stress hormones. And the amygdala is involved in processing emotions, and the role of emotional processing helps associate emotions to the different memories that we have. Also, the amygdala encodes memories at a deeper level if the event is more emotionally arousing. And then if you remember from biopsych, the amygdala is located inside the midbrain here. And it's this little green dot that you see. And the next structure that we will discuss is the hippocampus, which is involved with object and spatial recognition. And the hippocampus connects the cortical regions of the brain, so our visual senses, to provide meaning to memories. And it also helps with memory consolidation by transferring information to long-term memory through the association of adding meaning to these memories in our long-term memory. And then the hippocampus is located right near the amygdala. And there's this long pink structure here that's located to the amygdala, indicated in green. And then next we could talk about the cerebellum, which is involved in procedural memory, motor learning, and classical conditioning. And if you remember from biopsych, the cerebellum is involved with motor functions. And so if the body needs to respond in an action according to how we remember, like riding a bike, our cerebellum and our memory work together to provide information and regulation of our motor functions in order to ride that bike. And then the prefrontal cortex is also involved in memory by processing and retaining information in sensory and short-term memory. And the prefrontal cortex involves thinking, which helps us rehearse information in order to transfer information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And the neurotransmitters are involved by providing communication between different neurons to help develop memories and consolidate information. And then there's the arousal theory, which states that stronger emotions trigger the formation of stronger memories, whereas weaker emotions trigger weaker memories. And then we also have flashbulb memories, which is a recollection of memory about a particular event. And you could read more about these parts of the brain, functions, and structures in your textbook. Next, let's talk about the problems with memory. And so one obvious issue with memory that you might already know or be familiar with is amnesia, which is the loss of long-term memory that occurs as a result of disease, physical trauma, or psychological trauma. And there are two types, anterograde and retrograde amnesia. And here's a little diagram to help you remember those. Anterograde amnesia is commonly caused by brain trauma, such as a blow to the head. And a person who has anterograde amnesia can't remember new information, although they can remember information and events that happened prior to the injury. And remember, the key word is prior, so if this event happened here, so if a brain injury happened here, with anterograde amnesia, you're able to remember future and present information. You're unable to remember new information. And also the hippocampus is usually affected, which results in the inability to transfer information from short-term memory to long-term memory, and the inability to consolidate these memories. An example could be 50 First Dates, if you've seen the movie, where Drew Barrymore's character has anterograde amnesia, or a form of it, and she's unable to remember her current day once she wakes up the next day. But she's able to remember past events in her life. And the other type of amnesia is retrograde amnesia, which is the loss of memory for events that occurred prior to the trauma or event. And people who have retrograde amnesia can't remember some or even all of their past and have difficulty remembering episodic memories. These are people you may have seen in movies that completely forget who they are, such as Dory in Finding Nemo. Dory's unable to remember her past and who she is. And other problems with memory includes eyewitness misidentification, in which faulty eyewitness identification and testimony can lead to wrongful convictions. This is often due because our memory is poor at recalling specific details in a lineup. And there can be coercion and stress involved to identify someone, which may alter eyewitness identification. And there could also be misleading police procedures if police think they have the right person, and they might try to convince someone that it's the person that they think it is. And here's a graph from your textbook showing the percentage of wrongful convictions and the causes. And one of the leading causes is eyewitness misidentification. And there's also the misinformation effect, in which after exposure to incorrect information, a person may misremember the original event. And implied information such as police coercion can cause misidentification. And so different words such as smashed, collided, bumped, hit, or contacted might be perceived differently according to maybe the perceived speed of a car. If an eyewitness saw a speeding car and maybe a cop was trying to investigate how fast that car was going, if that cop used the word smashed in the event that a speeding car smashed, the eyewitness person may see that as a higher perceived speed of that car that they saw. Whereas if they just, if the policeman just said contacted instead, so the context of the word might perceive differently with the eyewitness person and may perceive the speed of the car going slower. And another problem with memory is forgetting, which I'm sure all of us do, which refers to the loss of information from long-term memory. And sometimes we can forget due to an encoding failure from short-term memory to long-term memory. And if this encoding process doesn't happen, then we can forget things. And sometimes we might just forget things because we might transfer big picture information from short-term memory to long-term memory, but we might not transfer the details from short-term memory to long-term memory. So for example, are you able to determine the correct quarter from your memory? A quarter, we know what a quarter is in our long-term memory. We know it's 25 cents, but we might not know the details of how it looks. So take a moment to think which one is the correct quarter, and then I'll tell you the answer soon. So this is the correct quarter, and you might have forgot that this is the correct quarter because you may have missed the details in where the words go or where the year goes. And then here's a list of some other memory failures. So for example, there could be transience, which is a type of forgetting. There's the accessibility of memory decreases over time. For example, this might be forgetting events that occurred a long time ago. There can be absent-mindedness, which is forgetting caused by lapses in your attention. So if you're not focused and attending to things, you might forget where your phone is. Another is blocking. This might be the accessibility of information that might be temporarily blocked. So if you're thinking of a word that's on the tip of your tongue, but you can't really think of it, this is blocking, forgetting. And then there's misattribution, which is the source of the memory is confused. So your memories are kind of distorted. And this might be recalling a dream from memory. There's suggestibility, which is false memories, another kind of distortion, which results, maybe result from a leading question, and maybe the police officer is trying to question you about a criminal that you're trying to identify. And so when you're trying to remember and recall what that criminal looks like, you might have a false memory. And there's bias, which is another type of distortion, and these memories are distorted by our current belief system, and only our biased memories uphold. And then there's persistence, which is the inability to forget undesirable memories, and these might be tragic or traumatic events. And then sometimes information is stored in our memory, but it is inaccessible, and this is known as interference. And there are two types of interference, either proactive interference or retroactive interference. And here's a nice photo to help you remember the two. So proactive interference is when old information hinders the recall of newly learned information. And then retroactive interference happens when information is learned more recently. That hinders the ability to recall older information. You could kind of remember this from the subwords here. So pro versus retro. Anything that's retro is based in the past. And so our ability to learn new information is hindered from this retro information. Whereas for proactive, old information that we learned is hindered based off pro or forward information, so new information. And so older information is hindered from the recall of new information that we're learning. And these are the differences between proactive and retroactive interference, with some examples that are listed. And then that's it for the structures of the brain, and then the problems with memory. In the next video, I'll be giving you some tips to how to improve your memory.